I gotta shoot Wills to make sure my brother didn't get hurt. That's because I was trying to protect the children.
This is Tyler Chaffin and Eli Chaffin, and on July 24th, 2022, in San Juan County, New Mexico, they took the life of 37-year-old William Johnson, leaving his body on the side of a quiet road after what they would later describe as a confrontation that got out of control. When the case finally made its way through court, one brother would walk away with a 6-year sentence, the other with 15 years. Punishments that many believed did not reflect the severity of what had been done. For the family of William Johnson, those numbers felt painfully small compared to the permanence of the grave. At the time of the killing, their mother, Tiffany Chaffin, stood beside her sons. She did not publicly condemn them. She did not express outrage at what had happened. There was no visible rebuke, no strong denunciation of the violence that had ended a man's life. Instead, she maintained her support, reinforcing their claim that they had only been protecting each other. To some observers, her composure appeared as loyalty. To others, it looked like indifference to the man who would never return home. The story that would unfold in the months ahead was not only about a deadly encounter on a rural road in New Mexico. It was about accountability, about plea agreements negotiated behind closed doors, and about a grieving family forced to listen, as legal terms reduced a violent death to years that could be counted and eventually completed. William Johnson was not a headline to those who loved him. He was a 37-year-old man with a job, responsibilities, and people who depended on him. Yet the men responsible for his death would not spend the rest of their lives behind bars. One of them would serve 6 years. The facts of that night would be argued in court, reshaped by defense attorneys, and weighed against the risks of trial by prosecutors. The brothers would insist the confrontation had escalated beyond their control. They would claim fear, protection, and instinct. What the evidence showed, and what the victim's family believed, painted a far more deliberate and unforgiving picture. When the dust settled, the legal system had delivered its answer. But for many watching from the gallery, justice felt incomplete. This is the story of what happened to William Johnson, how Tyler and Eli Chaffin carried out the act that ended his life, how they were taken into custody, and how a courtroom decision left a family standing in disbelief. William Johnson was 37 years old, a working man known in San Juan County for taking on mechanical jobs and buying and selling used vehicles on the side to support himself. On the afternoon of July 24th, 2022, he believed he was dealing with a dispute over a car, nothing more than a tense disagreement that could be argued out and settled. By the end of that evening, he would be lying dead along a rural stretch of road outside Farmington, New Mexico. The conflict began over a vehicle transaction that had gone wrong. Tyler Chaffin and Eli Chaffin claimed that money had been lost and that they had been treated unfairly. According to later court records, anger had been building for days. Messages were exchanged. Accusations were made. Each side insisted the other was responsible for the dispute. What could have remained a heated argument over property became something else when the brothers decided to confront William in person. They drove to meet him with more than words. One of them carried a firearm. That detail would become central to everything that followed, because it showed preparation. This was not a spontaneous fistfight between strangers. This was a meeting arranged after tempers had already risen, and one side arrived armed. When they found William, the discussion did not stay calm for long. Voices were raised, insults were traded. The brothers would later claim that William threatened them and that they feared for their safety. They would insist that they acted to protect each other, that events unfolded quickly, that they had no choice once the situation escalated. But investigators would look at the physical evidence in the sequence of events and see something more deliberate. At some point during the confrontation, a gun was drawn. The exact seconds before the trigger was pulled would become a matter of legal argument, but the result was not disputed. William Johnson was shot.
And I think somebody's either dead or bleeding across the street. One of the two. He was walking out of the house and they just started opening fire on him. It's like a white SUV.
The force of the impact dropped him. He was left wounded on the ground, and rather than call for help, rather than wait for authorities, the brothers made a decision that would seal their fate. They did not render aid. They did not attempt to save the man they had just shot. Instead, they removed him from the immediate scene and abandoned his body along a roadside area outside town. The location was isolated enough that they believed it would buy them time. It did not. The medical findings later confirmed that William died from the gunshot wounds inflicted during that confrontation. The distance of the shots, the angle, and the trajectory would all become part of the case file. Prosecutors would argue that the evidence contradicted the idea of desperate self-defense. They would say the brothers had pursued the encounter, armed themselves beforehand, and made a conscious decision to end a life rather than walk away. After leaving William's body, Tyler and Eli returned home. In the hours that followed, they contacted their mother, Tiffany Chaffin. They told her there had been a confrontation and that things had gone wrong. They framed it as protection, as survival, as brothers standing up for each other. Instead of urging them to turn themselves in immediately, instead of openly condemning what had happened, Tiffany remained aligned with her son's account. By the next day, William Johnson's body had been discovered. Law enforcement secured the scene and began collecting evidence. Tire impressions, ballistic findings, and digital communications would all begin to form a picture of what had taken place. The claim of mutual combat did not fully match the physical reality left behind on that roadside. The killing of William Johnson was not the result of a random encounter between strangers. It grew out of resentment over a vehicle dispute and escalated because two men chose confrontation over restraint and arrived prepared for violence. A disagreement over property ended in irreversible loss. The act itself lasted only moments, but its consequences would stretch far beyond that night.
I'm the neighbor. I do not want my name used. Gunshots less than 5 minutes ago. He hopped into a white, looked to be like a Ford Escape.
By the morning after William Johnson's body was discovered along the rural roadside outside Farmington, investigators in San Juan County were already building their case. The scene told its own story. There were ballistic fragments consistent with a handgun. There were tire impressions that did not belong to passing traffic. There were phone records that placed Tyler Chaffin and Eli Chaffin in the area during the window of time when William was killed. What the brothers had described to their mother as an unavoidable act of protection began to look, to detectives, like a planned confrontation that had ended in deadly force. Law enforcement moved quickly. Detectives interviewed individuals connected to the vehicle dispute and reviewed text messages exchanged in the days leading up to the shooting. Those messages showed rising frustration and anger over the car deal. They revealed that the brothers had arranged to meet William rather than avoid him. The tone was not one of fear, it was one of confrontation. That distinction would matter. When officers located Tyler and Eli, they did not find men in hiding. They found two brothers who believed they had a narrative that would protect them. During questioning, they repeated the same explanation they had given their mother. William had threatened them, and they acted to defend themselves.
I had to shoot Wills to make sure my brother didn't get hurt.
They described the encounter as chaotic and claimed the gun was used only because they feared serious harm. Investigators pressed for details. The timeline they provided did not fully align with the physical evidence collected at the scene. The placement of the body, the trajectory of the shots, and the absence of immediate calls for emergency assistance raised serious doubts. Detectives asked why, if this had truly been self-defense, no attempt had been made to contact authorities right away. The brothers did not offer a convincing answer. Within days, formal charges were filed. Both men were arrested and booked into custody. Initially, the charges reflected the severity of the act. First-degree murder for Tyler and related homicide charges for Eli. The decision to pursue serious counts signaled that prosecutors believed there was enough evidence to argue intent and preparation, not merely recklessness. During this period, Tiffany Chaffin remained publicly supportive of her sons. She attended early court appearances. She spoke with defense counsel. She stood by the assertion that her sons had been forced into a corner. There was no public statement condemning the violence that had ended William Johnson's life. Instead, there was a steady insistence that the brothers had only acted to protect one another. For the victim's family, watching that unwavering loyalty unfold added another layer of pain. They saw a mother defending her sons while their own loved one lay in the grave. In custody, the brothers awaited preliminary hearings. Prosecutors began outlining the case they intended to present if the matter went to trial. They emphasized the prior dispute, the decision to meet in person, and the fact that at least one of the brothers arrived armed. They pointed to the movement of William's body as evidence of consciousness of guilt, arguing that self-defense does not involve abandoning a wounded man on the side of the road. Defense attorneys prepared their counter-argument. They framed the brothers as young men caught in a tense situation that escalated unexpectedly. They suggested that fear, not malice, had guided their actions. They began signaling that they would challenge the degree of intent required for a first-degree conviction. As weeks turned into months, negotiations between prosecutors and defense counsel took place outside the public eye. The risks of a full jury trial were weighed against the certainty of negotiated outcomes. For William Johnson's family, each court date reopened wounds. They attended hearings where legal language replaced the raw reality of what had happened. They listened as attorneys debated statutes and sentencing ranges while their loss remained unchanged. Through it all, Tiffany maintained her position. She did not distance herself from her sons. She did not publicly acknowledge the suffering of the victim's family. Her focus stayed fixed on the legal survival of Tyler and Eli. Whether motivated by maternal instinct, denial, or belief in their version of events, her loyalty never wavered. By the time plea discussions intensified, the brothers had spent months behind bars awaiting resolution. The prosecution faced the burden of proving intent beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. The defense faced the possibility of life-altering sentences if a jury convicted on the highest charges. When the case of Tyler Chaffin and Eli Chaffin finally reached its decisive stage in a San Juan County courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy with expectation. William Johnson's family filled seats behind the prosecution, holding on to the hope that the legal system would deliver a punishment that reflected the weight of their loss. They had listened to months of arguments about intent, fear, escalation, and evidence. Now they were waiting for a conclusion that would measure a life in years of confinement. The original charges had carried the possibility of decades behind bars. First-degree murder is among the most serious accusations a person can face under New Mexico law. A conviction on that count would have meant a sentence so long that freedom would no longer be a realistic expectation. That was the outcome the victim's family believed matched what had happened on that roadside in July. Instead of a full jury trial, the case resolved through plea agreements negotiated between prosecutors and defense attorneys. Tyler Chaffin agreed to plead no contest to second-degree murder. Eli Chaffin pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. Those legal distinctions carried enormous consequences. Second-degree murder acknowledged intent to kill without the premeditation required for first degree. Involuntary manslaughter suggested recklessness rather than deliberate intent. With those classifications came reduced sentencing ranges. During the sentencing hearing, the facts of the case were summarized once more for the court. Prosecutors outlined the vehicle dispute, the armed confrontation, the gunshots that ended William Johnson's life, and the decision to abandon his body. They emphasized that the brothers had chosen to meet him and that one of them had arrived prepared to use deadly force. They asked the judge to impose substantial prison terms within the boundaries of the plea agreements. Defense attorneys urged the court to consider the brothers' youth, their lack of extensive prior criminal records, and their claim that fear had driven their actions. They argued that the encounter spiraled beyond what anyone expected, and that the brothers had panicked afterward. They presented them as men who made a catastrophic decision in a moment of anger rather than calculating killers who plotted an execution. When members of William Johnson's family addressed the court, their grief was unmistakable. They spoke about the man they had lost, about birthdays and holidays that would never be the same, about children and relatives who would grow older without him. They described the pain of hearing their loved one's death reduced to legal terminology. They expressed disbelief that the men responsible might one day walk free after serving a finite number of years. For them, the sentence could never balance the scale. The judge imposed the agreed-upon terms. Tyler Chaffin received a 15-year sentence for second-degree murder. Eli Chaffin received 6 years for involuntary manslaughter. Both would face a period of probation after release. In the language of the court, the matter was resolved. The gavel fell, and the numbers were recorded. For William Johnson's family, the resolution felt hollow. 6 years for one brother meant that, with credit for time served and good behavior, the actual time behind bars could be shorter than the public imagined. Even 15 years, in their eyes, did not equate to life taken at 37. They left the courthouse carrying the same grief they had carried since July, now accompanied by the knowledge that the punishment had limits. Throughout the proceedings, Tiffany Chaffin remained aligned with her sons. She sat through hearings and sentencing without publicly condemning their actions. There was no visible break between her and the men who had admitted roles in the death of William Johnson. Her loyalty endured even as another family mourned. The legal system had delivered its judgment, but the emotional verdict among the victims' relatives was clear. They believed the punishment did not reflect the gravity of the crime. They believed the plea agreements reduced a violent killing to a set of numbers that could be counted down on a calendar. William Johnson's life ended on a roadside in San Juan County. Tyler and Eli Chaffin will eventually complete their sentences. For one family, time will move forward with the possibility of release and return. For the other, time will move forward without a son, a brother, a relative who will never come home. Few believe stories like this deserve to be told in full. And if you want to continue examining cases where the outcome leaves families questioning justice, like this video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story.